Today, we're diving into a really tough but important topic: spiritual abuse inside the Jehovah's Witness community. We're going to be pulling from a whole bunch of sources: academic research, official government investigations, and most importantly, the stories of people who've lived it.
So let's just ask the big question right up front. What happens when faith, which for so many people is a source of comfort and hope, gets twisted into a tool for control and a way to hide terrible things? To really get into that, we first have to be clear on what we mean by spiritual abuse.
So let's lock in a clear definition. Spiritual abuse isn't about arguing over beliefs. According to the research, it's when someone misuses their spiritual authority to manipulate, control, or hurt people. And the main weapons in that arsenal? Shame and fear.
Okay, so that's the textbook definition, but what does it actually look like in the real world? Let's break down how this stuff really shows up, especially in what you'd call a high-control religious group.
Well, the source material points to a few key trademarks. You've got authoritarian leadership, where you're just not allowed to question things. Then there's coercive control, meddling in people's personal lives. Dissent gets silenced fast. And, this is a huge one, misconduct gets covered up by using religious rules, like the infamous two-witness rule, to protect the institution itself. All this is capped off with a practice of extreme social punishment called shunning.
Now, this isn't just theory. Let's look at a real-world case where all these things were put under a microscope. A truly groundbreaking investigation in Australia gave us the first big, data-driven look at the problem.
And what made this investigation so just unbelievable was where the evidence came from. The commission got their hands on the organization's own secret files. We're talking about an internal archive of abuse allegations that went back more than 60 years.
So what did they find in those files? Get this, more than 1,800 child victims. And remember, this number comes directly from the organization's own records. It's absolutely staggering.
So with over 1,800 documented cases of child abuse in their files, how many do you think they reported to the police? The answer is 0. Not a single one. This wasn't an accident. It shows a very clear, deliberate policy to handle everything in-house, far away from the eyes of the law.
The Commission's final report was just scathing. It concluded that internal policies like that two-witness rule were actively getting in the way of justice, and that, bottom line, children were not being kept safe. When the Commission recommended they change these policies, the organization's leaders refused, saying their rules were Bible-based and couldn't be changed.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's awful. But was Australia just a one-off? A unique case?
Well, the evidence that's come out since then suggests it wasn't an outlier at all. In fact, it was the beginning of a disturbing global pattern.
Let's hop over to Europe. In the Netherlands, the government itself commissioned a study in 2020. Researchers gathered almost 800 testimonies from people inside and outside the group. So this isn't just a newspaper story, it's a serious academic investigation.
And the findings? They were just as stark. 39% of the people who responded, that's 292 individuals, said they were abuse survivors. And what did they think of the internal process for handling it? It was a total failure. 75% were unhappy with the response, and a whopping 60% gave it the absolute lowest rating possible.
The same pattern kept showing up. In the UK, a 2018 investigation by The Guardian really opened the floodgates. Over 100 people came forward, and their stories sounded hauntingly similar to what was heard in Australia and the Netherlands.
One survivor put it this way, describing a culture of cover-ups and lies. They said that elders would actively discourage them from going to the police because it would damage the organization's reputation, or, in their words, bring reproach on Jehovah.
And that brings us to the United States. A massive grand jury investigation in Pennsylvania, which is still going on, has been digging up decades of these hidden abuse files. It's drawing a lot of parallels to the state's huge inquiry into the Catholic Church, showing the exact same pattern of concealment was happening here, too.
So, we've talked about the institutional cover-up of criminal behavior. But there's another form of harm here, a deeply psychological one that we really need to understand, and that's the practice of shunning.
The official term is disfellowshipping, but here's what it means in plain English. When someone is kicked out, or even if they choose to leave, every other Jehovah's Witness is ordered to cut off all contact with them. We're not just talking about being ignored at meetings. This is a mandated, total severing of ties with your friends, your entire community, and even your own parents, siblings, and children.
And the psychological toll of this is just
devastating. The 2023 European study of former members found that a third, 1 out of every 3 people, had experienced suicidal thoughts. Even more shocking, 1 in 10 had actually attempted suicide. I mean, those rates are just catastrophically higher than in the general population.
To even begin to grasp the human cost behind those numbers, just listen to this from a survivor named Amy. She left to get away from her abuser, and for that, she was shunned. She says, "My own siblings view me as dead."
And here's another story from Renee, who was disfellowshipped at just 21. She talks about losing her entire world overnight. Being cast out into a world she was completely unprepared for, she says, was one of the worst experiences of her life.
So, when you pull back and look at all this evidence together, what's the big picture? Well, the argument in the source material is that what we're seeing here isn't just a series of scandals, it's the predictable result of a system.
And this really brings us to the most critical point of this whole explainer. The problem might not be that the actual rate of abuse is any higher than in the general public or other groups. The fundamental, game-changing difference, and the thing that causes so much extra pain, is the institutional response. You have policies like the two-witness rule and shunning that create a system almost perfectly designed to hide abuse and re-traumatize the victims who try to speak up.
So, to wrap it all up, the evidence from Australia, from Europe, from the US, it isn't pointing to a few bad apples. It's pointing to a system where the policies put in place to protect the organization's image consistently and tragically come at the expense of its most vulnerable people.
And that really leaves us with one final, heavy question to think about. When an institution values its own secrecy more than the safety and well-being of its followers, what is the true cost?